Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Arecor Therapeutics PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged. They can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and will publish those responses where it's appropriate to do so on the Investor Meet Company platform. Before we begin, we would just like to submit the following poll, and if you could give that your kind attention, I'm sure the company would be most grateful. And I would now like to hand you over to the executive management team from ARECOR Therapeutics PLC. Sarah, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mark. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name's Dr. Sarah Howell, and I'm the CEO of Arecor Therapeutics, and I'm joined today by David Ellum, our CFO. And we'll talk you through today Arecor's interim results for the 6 months ending 30th of June 2025, and also some significant events and deals and news flow that you may have seen that we announced with our results last week. So I'll draw your attention to our customary legal notice. So just as a little bit of a recap, Arecor is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company. We're very much focused on drug development and delivery for diabetes and other cardiometabolic diseases. We have our own proprietary product portfolio where we're targeting areas of significant unmet patient needs in high value markets, very much in the diabetes and obesity space. We have our lead program, AT278, within that proprietary portfolio that we'll be talking about in much more detail today. We also partner with major pharmaceutical and biotech companies. This is leveraging our Arestat technology platform to develop enhanced versions of their existing therapeutic products. We have a very strong corporate and financial position, particularly with the royalty financing deal that we entered into that we announced last week, which gives us cash runway through to the first half of 2027. And David will talk through some of the details of that deal in much more detail later. We have very multiple near and medium-term value inflection points, really furthering our ambition to bring significant benefits to people living with diabetes and other cardiometabolic diseases and building significant value for our shareholders. And of course, we'll talk through those in much more detail today. So if we look across our portfolio and pillars of value here, as we mentioned, we're very much focused on transforming patient care by bringing these enhanced therapeutics to market that reduce burden and improve outcomes with people living with these serious conditions. We do this by leveraging our innovative and proprietary formulation technology platform that we call Arestat to develop these novel formulations of existing therapeutics that would be otherwise unachievable. As I mentioned, across our internal proprietary portfolio, we're very much focused in the diabetes and obesity space. We have 2 clinical stage insulin products where we've demonstrated best-in-class clinical data against the best insulins that are available for patients today. And that's across phase 1 clinical studies. And we're also preparing for AT278, which is our lead disruptor insulin, for a pivotal phase 2 clinical study. And that's on the back of a co-development partnership with Sequel MedTech, who we'll talk about again in much more detail. And we're also developing a novel proprietary technology platform for the oral delivery of peptides, starting with GLP-1. And then just looking quickly at our partner programs, as you can see here, we're partnered with leading pharma and biotech companies, as well as medtech companies such as Eli Lilly, Medtronic, Sky, etc. And this really validates the need and the value of the Arestat technology platform, and of course provides significant upside potential for us from our licensing model. So now going to move on to talk a little bit more about our interim results. So at the beginning of the year, for anybody that's following us in more detail, we were really clear that we were refocusing the business on opportunities within R&D that would present the most significant value creation. And we've done this, and we're making great progress here. We've continued to advance our lead diabetes products and our proprietary products, particularly our lead clinical program, AT278, and the oral delivery of peptides there, both of which I'll cover in more detail. Across our partner portfolio, we've entered into 3 new formulation development partnerships. So this brings in pre-license revenue of over £1 million. But as I've mentioned, really significant upside potential here is future licensing under our milestone and royalty bearing model. We said we would wind down Tetris as a non-core operation. We're doing this, and that's fully on track. I won't talk on this slide actually around the financial highlights because David will cover those in more detail again later. So let's move across to... Okay, great. Let's move across to the significant deals that we announced last week. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the year, we really refocused the business, and our priority was to pursue high-value R&D opportunities that can bring the most value to patients and also to our shareholders. And we announced 2 deals last week that are significant milestones that will enable us to drive this strategy forward and achieve these ambitions. For AT278, we've been really clear that the most value to patients and also to drive the most value commercially for Arecor and our shareholders, the combination of AT278, which is a highly concentrated, very rapid-acting insulin with a next-generation automated insulin delivery system. So this is an insulin pump in combination with the technology of the continuous blood glucose monitors and also the algorithms here. So our strategic priority has been very clear here, that it's to enter into a partnership with an innovative insulin pump company or an aid system company to further develop and commercialize AT278. And we announced last week that we've entered into a co-development partnership with Sequel Medtech, where both companies will contribute up to $1.3 million to take AT278 to phase 2 ready. And I'll talk about that in more detail very shortly. We also then entered into a royalty financing agreement with Ligand, and that's for the financial rights to AT220, which is a biosimilar, which is on the market and royalty bearing, and also AT292, which is a phase 2 clinical stage asset, which is under the ownership of Sanofi. And this $11 million with $7 million received up front extends our cash runway into the first half of 2027. So, of course, strengthens our balance sheet and also enabled us to enter into the co-development deal with Sequel Medtech. So just moving on just to a little bit more detail around, the slides are jumping around a little bit, sorry about that, around AT278. So I'm going to give you some background around insulins, their combinations with insulin pumps, and the technology there, next innovations in the insulin pump arena and insulins themselves, and then talk a little bit more about Sequel Medtech to put that into context. So just taking a step back, and I'm not going to talk around all of these events in detail, but insulin's been around for a long time. It's been around for just over 100 years since it was first discovered in the 1920s. But we have seen significant developments across insulin. We've seen new insulin analogues developed, and the real drive here for mealtime insulins has to be developed them to make them much faster acting, so more physiologic. And so we now have short acting or faster acting insulins on the market, albeit they're not as fast as Arecor's insulins, and we'll talk about why that's important in a moment. And we've seen really significant advancements in technology, from the very first pump that you can see on the bottom left-hand side of your screen here was literally the size of a backpack, through to first insulin pumps that were developed for use outside of the clinic, which were developed by Dean Kamen, right through to today, where we see these very sophisticated, what we call automated insulin delivery systems, So pumps that can be body worn or are tethered, so you might wear them on your belt or in your pocket. We see continuous blood glucose monitors that can monitor your blood glucose at any point in time, and then sophisticated algorithms that can calculate, based on those blood glucose measurements, how much insulin is needed. So there's been huge advancements, and really seeing this combination of both insulin and technology to help improve outcomes for people living with diabetes. So the question here then is, what's next for insulin delivery, for patient outcomes, and how does AT278 fit into this? Well, what we're seeing is there's very much a drive from both pharma companies and device companies, and very much an ask from the patient population to reduce burden. So diabetes and managing diabetes is a high burden disease. So really the ask here is, can we help people living with diabetes better manage their disease, better manage their blood glucose levels, but whilst reducing the burden, so reducing the interaction that they have to have with these systems. And to do this, the real ask here are very much around having insulin pumps that can be worn for longer, so you can fit and forget to a certain extent. So to move away from the current 3-day wear to 7 days wear plus, and for these pump systems to be much smaller, so that it's much less in terms of visible indicator of the fact that you're living with a chronic disease. And doing this whilst improving outcomes. So outcomes are really key here, and this is about your time in range. So can we deliver a better time in range, better blood glucose control, whilst reducing that burden? That's the real ask from patients. And how AT278 can fit into this, of course, if you want to make these pumps to be longer wear systems and make them also smaller, this means you have to get much more insulin on board, or within the cartridges, within the insulin pumps, in a much, much smaller volume. So you need a highly concentrated, very rapid acting insulin. And Arecor is the only company with a insulin that fits this profile, because it's particularly difficult to achieve. There's then a subset of patients that have high total daily insulin needs. This is a significant proportion, in fact, of the patient population. So in the US alone, there's around 4 million people who are taking mealtime insulin today, and just over 1 million of those require more than 100 units of insulin a day. So they can't use the current aid systems. They're not practical for them, because they can't even get to 3-day wear. And then there are around 1 million people with diabetes in the US that are using insulin pumps, that would be patients that could move over to an AT278 aid system because of the longer wear, smaller form factor, and the fact that we can improve outcomes because it's the fastest acting insulin. So if we take these two patient populations, that gives you an initial target revenue market for insulin revenue in the US alone of $2.9 billion. So it's also a significant commercial opportunity here. So for AT278, it has the opportunity as being the only highly concentrated, ultra-rapid acting insulin. We've shown this across clinical studies, both in type 1 diabetic patients, but also type 2s with high BMIs. We've shown superiority to the best insulins that are out there from Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, that we can really catalyze this next leap in diabetes innovation alongside a disruptive aid insulin company as well. So that leads us on to the strategic partnership with Sequel MedTech. So Sequel are a commercial stage US-based insulin pump company. They have an innovative aid system that they call Twist that is approved. They launched this system in July in the US, and they're very, very rapidly rolling across the US. They now have a sales force which is the same size as the three incumbent insulin companies, so Medtronic, Insulet, and Tandem, and they have now rolled out to 110 territories. So they're moving very, very quickly, and their aim to be the number one insulin pump company in the US and beyond. They have a rich history in innovation. So they were co-founded by Dean Kamen, as I mentioned on a previous slide, was the inventor of the first insulin pump to be used outside of the hospital setting, and probably most famously known for being the inventor of the Segway. So they have this rich history of innovation, but also the commercial infrastructure and the expertise to rapidly roll out a next generation insulin pump and aid system within the US. There are also some very key technical and innovation features of the twist pump, which made this an ideal partnership for Arecor. So safety is absolutely key here. AT278 is a 5 times concentrated insulin. So it's really important that we know exactly how much insulin is being delivered via the aid system, and it's delivered very precisely. And the twist pump is the only system that can directly measure the exact volume of insulin that's being delivered with every microdose. So every pulse of insulin that's delivered, the pump uses sound waves to measure very accurately how much insulin has been delivered. And this is really important when you're talking about 5 times more concentrated insulin. This level of precision also means that it has the potential there that we can get the best out of the very fast kinetics or the very fast glucose lowering profile for AT278, because we can be more aggressive with the algorithms, we can be confident and being more aggressive with those algorithms. So we can really drive improvements in time and range here. And as I mentioned, what the patients are looking for is improved outcomes, of course, time and range, longer wear and smaller form factors. So together we can deliver all of these advancements to the patient population here and obviously capture market share. It also detects occlusions 9 times faster than the existing pumps that are on the market today. So this occlusions means blocking of the pump. So again, it means that we can be really confident about that safety features, the precision and accuracy of delivery of a 5 times concentrated insulin, which makes the twist pump and Sequel MedTech an ideal partner for AT278. And as we announced last week, we've entered into this partnership to right through to phase 2 enabling, and there's also strategic intent from both companies to enter into a broader development and commercialization partnership for AT278 in an aid system. So in terms of just to dive into a little bit more detail in terms of next steps and what does that phase 2 clinical study look like, we also have received very positive feedback from the FDA on our clinical study design for AT278 in an aid system. This gives us confidence around that study design and also now the data that we need to generate for a successful IND. And this is the data that we'll be generating between now and the middle of next year with this co-investment with Sequel MedTech. And this phase 2 clinical study will really be a very innovative, first of its kind study. We'll be measuring time and range, which is a really important metric here for patients, in a 6-week crossover study in both type 1s and type 2s. So again, we see that very broad application across the patient population. Obviously, the next phase here will be to select clinical sites in the US. This is a study we will do in the US. It's less than 100 subjects, and that will have an influence on the costings of this study, but we're confident that the study will be less than $15 million. And we're looking to enter into this study in the second half of 2026, and it's approximately a year from initiating the study right through to full clinical readout. So you're looking at the middle of 2027 for that. So just changing tack slightly here, just to talk about oral delivery of peptides. This is another pillar of value of focus for Arecor, and this is in the R&D phase. So here we're very much looking at, we know that peptides as a class of therapeutics are really exploding. There's over 800 peptides in active development across pharma companies today, but there are only 2 peptides on the market today that are orally delivered. And there's a real drive towards being able to convert therapeutics that would historically be delivered by injection to oral delivery. There's a patient preference there, leads to compliance and adherence and improved outcomes there. The challenge is also with those only 2 peptides that are on the market today is they have very poor bioavailability. So this means that once you take the oral peptide, only less than 1% actually here of that peptide is orally bioavailable, so is actually working post you taking therapeutic. So there's a real drive here for, can we develop a platform technology that be broadly applicable to peptides that would improve that oral bioavailability? Now, we started with GLP-1, and this is because there's a real need within the GLP-1 area. There is an oral GLP-1 called Rybelsus that's on the market today. It has less than 1% bioavailability, so significant room for improvement here. It's obviously, there's high demand here, there's a large patient population, so a commercial opportunity in its own right. But if we're successful with GLP-1, this is around then extending it to a broader group of peptides as a platform technology. And what we're seeing across this space is really significant acceleration in deal making, and this is spanning all of the kind of deal making metrics here, from licensing and in licensing products, in licensing or buying technology platforms, M&A and investment across this space. And we know ourselves from talking to major pharmaceutical companies, there's a real incoming need for oral delivery peptides. So we're asked on a regular basis by those big pharma companies, where are we with our oral delivery of peptides technology platform? When are we ready to share data? So there's a real pull and need for truly innovative platform technology approaches to solve this problem. As I said, it's at R&D phase. The reason Arecor is focused in this area is it's essentially a formulation challenge, and this is where we are experts. That's our real USP, and we've been able to demonstrate across our own proprietary platform and also our partnerships with pharma that we're able to develop novel formulation approaches that can deliver enhancements that have otherwise been unachievable. So I'm just going to hand over to David to talk through our financials.
Thank you, Sarah. So back in January, we said that we would close out Tetris, maintain patient supply during that period of time, generate cash from Tetris, reduce the SG&A expenses in the business that we have, while at the same time maintaining our focus on the high value areas, in particular the AT278. And Sarah mentioned, that is today what we're able to say that we have done. You can see in the attached numbers that the R&D costs have remained low as we have been prepping for the phase 2 enabling work. And there's been a good size reduction in the SG&A costs, and that's all coming through from Tetris. On the revenue side, we're stable at 2 million, and actually in the half year compared to the prior half year, we've had an increased contribution on the partner side, and then we have had a decrease in the product side as we are winding down on the Tetris level. The 0.4 million gain on disposal, that was from in the first half of the year when we announced the sale of the non-Agluo products to Aspire, and that all went through, and we collected the money from that as well since then. So we ended the period with a cash balance of 1.9 million. And then obviously since then, sort of within 24 hours of closing the deal announced last week, we have received the first $7 million from Ligand. So that's what then gives us the cash runway through into the first half of 2027 quite comfortably. Next slide, please. So just looking specifically at the royalty financing agreement with Ligand, I mean, first of all, we're very happy to have Ligand as a partner. They have a market cap on NASDAQ of $3.5 billion. So they can also be a great partner for us going forward if we need additional non-dilutive financing. As mentioned, we received the 7 million upfront immediately, and we're very confident that within 12 months we will receive the next $1 million. So all of that together then is all part of the cash runway moving through into the first half of 2027. And the key thing to this is that it gives us plenty of time to negotiate the full phase 2 and possibly the commercialization deal that we're very keen to do on AT278. Thank you.
So just to round off the formal presentation today, I think as we've spoken through today, very much Arecor's focus is in areas of high value R&D where we can meet those significant patient needs in high value therapeutic areas such as the diabetes and obesity space. Clearly the co-development agreement with Sequel MedTech allows us to accelerate now AT278 towards phase 2 clinical development, and also with that strategic intent from both partners to enter into a much broader development and commercialization agreement. We have a real opportunity here to bring a much improved therapy to people living with diabetes that will improve their outcomes in a large initial $2.9 billion target market in the US, obviously upside there as you expand out of the US as well. As we've spoken about, we are working on delivering a game-changing, we would say here, oral delivery peptide for a platform technology for peptides. We'll be generating key pharmacokinetic data. So this is animal data, focusing on improving bioavailability through the second half of this year and beyond. And of course, with the royalty financing deal that we've entered into, this gives us an enhanced runway through to the first half of 2027. Of course, allows us to accelerate AT278 and strengthens the balance sheet here for future deal making. So we have a very clear focus here and the ability to convert these near and medium term value drivers for the business. So that really concludes the formal presentation for today, but we'd be happy to take any questions.
Perfect. Sarah, David, if I may just jump back in there, and thank you very much indeed for your presentation this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab that's situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the team take a few moments to review those questions that have been submitted already, I'd just like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can all be accessed via your investor dashboards. Guys, as you can see there, we have received a number of questions throughout your presentation this morning, and thank you to all of those on the call for taking the time to submit their questions. But Sarah, David, at this point, if I may just hand back to you just to read out those questions and give your responses where it's appropriate to do so. And if I pick up from you at the end, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So I'll read out the questions and then I'll either answer them or hand them over to David. So the first question is, why have you chosen Sequel as a partner rather than one of the bigger pump companies? That's a good question. I think for us, as I'd explained, there were some really key elements to the Sequel partnership. We've been talking to all of the device companies for some time now, including Sequel. The reason for entering into the partnership with Sequel is that they are a company rich in innovation, of course, as I mentioned there, including diabetes innovation, the commercial stage in the US. They are really embarking on and rolling out the fastest launch of an aid system in the US in history. So they launched in July of this year. They said they would be in 110 territories by the end of August. They have done that, and they have a sales force that's actually now the same size as those bigger pump companies. I assume the person asking the bigger pump companies, we're talking about Medtronic, Insulet and Tandem, who are the incumbents on the market today. They're also well capitalized. They're a private company, but they've raised $550 million in Series A funding from high quality family offices and specialist investors here. And we can see there from the way that they're rolling out the twist pump in the US, they're very confident in their proposition and the value proposition to patients, but also the commercial proposition clearly to go from launch through to matching the big three in terms of their infrastructure and capacity here. And so there's a combination of the commercial, of course, but also there's a real strategic fit here. They want to be number one in the US and beyond here, and they see innovation as the way to do that and disruption. They're coming in as a disruptive force, and they very much see that next phase is longer wear, miniaturization, and also bringing an aid system to people with diabetes who have that high insulin need that's practical and usable for them. So that's that over 1 million people in the US today that simply can't access these systems. So there's a real opportunity to open up access to more people and also, of course, open up and broaden that commercial opportunity. So we see Sequel as a great partner for us moving forward. So the next question is, what should we expect to hear from Arecor for the rest of the year? Again, good question. Obviously, with the deal that we've entered into with AT278, a clear focus for us now, and it's already started, we'll be preparing for the phase 2 clinical studies. So that's work that's ongoing now through to the middle of next year. So the team here obviously very excited and very busy working on preparing for those studies. And we have very clear guidance from the FDA of what's required. So we know what's needed to submit a successful IND or investigational new drug application for AT278. Clearly, we've highlighted oral delivery of peptides as a key value driver for us. So again, there's a focus there and a very scientific focus there on opportunities and formulation opportunities to improve bioavailability. And again, the teams are very busy in terms of those iterative PK or pharmacokinetic studies now to understand what's going to drive improvements there. Very difficult challenge, but if we can be successful there, we know there's a pull from both patient need, but also pharma. So that would be a rich area for deal making for us. And that probably is a segue into, of course, business development. We continue to partner with major pharma, biotech and medtech companies. We have a healthy pipeline there, and we have existing opportunities of proprietary products that we're working on. So, of course, as and when we enter into new deals, we can update the market, but that's still very much a focus for us. So the next question is, why do a monetization deal rather than a placing? So I'll probably start and then I'll hand over to you, David, if I miss anything key that you want to add to that. So, again, I think we've been very clear and open about this, that we were looking at non-dilutive routes as to raise funds here. So we haven't gone out and attempted a placing there, because we made a conscious decision to follow the non-dilutive route. I mean, having an access for up to $11 million here, clearly on a non-dilutive basis, with $7 million upfront. So that's been received. Another $1 million anticipated through 2026. Of course, strengthens our position for future deal making as well. And the reason we've gone for non-dilutive funding, if we look at current market conditions, equity funding at this stage would be pretty punitive. So punitive for Arecor, but most importantly for our shareholders here. So we considered and do still consider non-dilutive royalty financing to be the best option available to us. And, we've done a good deal here. There was a number of options for us on the table, and Ligand was the best option for the business. And perhaps, David, you might want to talk a little bit more about that, around the kind of process that we went through there.
Yeah, sure. And as Sarah said, we were looking at this for several months. We did speak with several firms. We did have more than the one offer. And we were quite readily convinced that Ligand made the best sense for us with the amount of the upfront. But I would also, as mentioned earlier, they're a great partner to have for, whatever may happen in the future. We're looking forward to working with them. And I think that it is really, and it relates to one of the other questions, is that having that money now allows us the time to really get into negotiating the next stage of the phase 2 and forward commercialization deal.
Thanks, David. So the next question is, given recent M&A and activity in obesity, do you see Arecor as a potential acquisition target once oral peptide data matures? I mean, as it was shown, and the slide that we showed there, you could almost update it on a weekly basis. There was the announcement. I can't remember whether it was late last week or early this week, Pfizer acquiring Metsera as an example, which isn't currently on our slide there. So there is a huge amount of deal activity there. For Arecor and, as a leadership team, what we're really focused on is driving our programs forward and adding value to the business. And, that's got to be our focus there. And by adding that value to the business and moving those products forward, we put ourselves in a stronger position. So that's, very much our focus there. We are obviously well network connected. We're, talking to all the right companies in this space. So really for us, it will be around navigating now. We've got real opportunity to drive real value for Arecor. So that'll be our, our focus operationally and externally as well. But, there's clearly a lot of activity in that space. So next question is for you, David. How sensitive is the cash runway guidance to first half of 27 to potential delays in AT278 or the oral GLP-1 program?
Sure, and I think within the RNS announcements, we spoke about that the plan would be to complete all of the phase 2 enabling pre-activities within the first half of 2026, and we state that the runway goes into the first half for 2027. So in terms of sensitivity, then I think that gives us a long time to arrange that deal. And then how sensitive is the runway to the GLP-1 program? So we have budgeted forecast to continue spending in that area at the same level that we are now. That still gets us through to H1 2027. And then obviously, if during that time we have convincing results, then we sort of come back to the board and decide on what's the best way to proceed with that. But we have the time to come to a phase 2 and longer stage deal, and we have the time to continue working on the GLP-1 program.
Thanks, David. Answered that one. So the next question is, what options are being considered to fund AT278? I think there's also another question from somebody else, which I think we'll roll in together, which is, what is the company's ideal commercial deal for AT278 and when might it be signed? So I think for us, in terms of next stages for AT278, obviously we're focused on those operationally on the phase 2 enabling studies that would enable us to be enter into that phase 2 clinical study in the second half of 2026. So that gives you a framework of our timeline here. We want to move forward in clinical development as soon as we're able to. So as soon as we have all of the data that's required for an IND approval with the FDA. So it's during that time, and in parallel to that time is our opportunity here for next phase of deal making. The front runner there, both companies have confirmed that strategic intent for all the reasons that we've talked around today. Sequel Medtech are a great partner for AT278, but there's also an opportunity here to leverage that competitive tension across those other insulin pump and device companies that we've talked about today. So it's very active commercial deal-making activity, as you would expect, ongoing at the moment. And that time frame is that we want to move forward into clinical development seamlessly. That would be the ideal there. And in terms of deal structures, obviously here, and as we've talked about, there's a real significant value opportunity here. We're talking about a target patient population that's over 2 million people with diabetes, and this is not everybody. We're not saying that AT278 in an aid system is for everybody. So we're being really clear here and stratifying that patient population where there's a real need and a real unmet need that can be achieved and can be addressed with AT278 and aid system. But that still translates to a very significant opportunity here. So that $2.9 billion market in the US alone. So there's a significant opportunity for Arecor to drive value. And following on from that, then it's a case of deal structure. So the first deal structure with Sequel obviously is a 50-50 co-funding through to phase 2 ready there. So, we are looking at deal structures around co-funding opportunities here with Arecor and partners, which also allows Arecor to retain more of that value moving forward. Of course, if Arecor isn't investing in that clinical development, then that translates into, and it has an impact on share of upside once the product's commercialized. So it's a real balance here. Of course, it's going to be a balance between investment through to bringing the product to market versus percentage value share once it's on market. And of course, our motivation is to do the very best deal for Arecor and to return the best value proposition to our shareholders. So that's very much what we'll be working out over the next period until we enter into that phase 2 clinical study in the second half of next year. That's probably all I should say, really, because I don't want to give too much away in terms of our metrics around what we think would be the best deal for us or negotiating tactics across those device companies. So the next question, which is a good follow-on from that, is what is the expected timeline to market after the phase 3 trial? So yeah, just because I didn't show all the way to market slide here. So the next phase is to do the phase 2 clinical study. That's less than 100 patients, type 1s and type 2s. There is a requirement to do a phase 3 study, but this is again, a small contained study. We're confident that would be less than 500 subjects there, and to generate key data that's required both for regulatory approval by the FDA and other regulators, but also for pricing and reimbursement metrics as well that we need to develop over that phase 3 clinical study. So at the moment, obviously subject to deal making and seamless funding for that, that would translate to the ability to launch AT278 in an aid system in 2030. So the next question is, of the healthy pipeline of partnerships mentioned, how many are in advanced negotiations and what therapeutic areas are they targeting? I'll tell you what I can on this one. Obviously, one of our partnerships that we entered into this year is in the public domain. So that was with Sky Biosciences for nimacimab. That's in the obesity portfolio. And they actually, I think earlier in September, announced some headline phase 2 clinical data for that product where they're showing, great data in terms of weight loss. So that's the primary endpoint and the primary target for that therapeutic. And again, they've been very public that they are looking for a much more concentrated version of nimacimab, which would improve delivery to patients. And that's where Arecor obviously comes into the mix. The other partnerships that we've announced, we haven't announced therapeutic areas, even for Eli Lilly, where they were happy for us, maybe happy is that, but with our relationship, they allowed us to talk about their name, and of course they're the largest pharma company in the world now. But the therapeutic areas have not been mentioned. But what I can tell you is that we've very deliberately focused our BD and partnership and commercial efforts here with pharma in areas of, where there is high unmet patient need, where they have novel therapeutics to address those, so the potential to be really high value blockbuster products. And the reason for that is, of course, then where they're looking for improvements and enhancements to those products, there's a real drive there. It's a strategic focus within the business, and that increases and enhances the opportunity for license conversions, which is really where we can drive the value for Arecor, and also see our technology embedded in products on the market that meet our aim and mission and goals here of improving outcomes for people living with chronic diseases. So they are all associated with chronic diseases in large patient populations, large value markets, and obviously the sky is in the obesity space, which we know very well. So the final question I think that we've got today so far is, what is the ownership structure of GLP-1? When do you think it will enter clinical trials, and how will that be funded? So in terms of the work that we're doing in GLP-1, we're using semaglutide, which is the active drug that's used in Novo Nordisk Rybelsus, and we're accessing that, and we can access that through contract manufacturers. So the data that we're generating here and the IP, of course, that we're generating is all fully owned by Arecor. So we have complete freedom to operate over that data and that IP, and also, of course, then to leverage that moving forward. In terms of clinical trials, I think the first question is whether we would enter into clinical trials ourselves or not with the GLP-1. I mean, what we're seeing here across the deal-making space as well is, because of the real need in this area, because there still isn't a great options for oral delivery. We're still looking at less than 1% on the market, and even where deals are being done, the bioavailability is still very low. But these deals are being done early. So the deal it was on the previous slide, one of those deals was Cypramed, for example. So they have some approaches for the oral delivery of peptides. They seem to be from their IP, so that's where we kind of mine and get data from as well, being able to enable bioavailability of between 1% and 3%, depending on which peptide it is. It's all non-clinical animal data, so very similar to the data that we're now generating. And on the back of that, and they had that across multiple peptides, Merck came in and did that deal. So it's a buy-books deal, so we don't know the exact structure of that, but it's a $500 million buy-books deal for access to their oral delivery technology approaches. So that gives you both, some guidance there and some understanding of the kind of bioavailability that seems to be transformational in this space. But also, interestingly, deals are being done before clinical phase as well. So that, first phase for Arecor is to develop the technology. If it's successful, there will be an exercise there of going out and talking to pharma before we make any decisions of whether or not we're going to take it any further into clinical development.
Sarah, David, if I may just jump back in there, and thank you very much indeed for addressing all of those questions that came in from investors this morning. And of course, if there are any further questions that do come through, we'll make these available to you immediately after the presentation has ended, just for you to review. But Sarah, perhaps before really now just looking to redirect those on the call to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to yourself and the company, if I could please just ask you for a few closing comments just to wrap up with, that'd be great.
Sure, thanks, Mark. So, I think what I would say here is that we're in great shape. The deals that we've done recently around AT278, the strategic intent moving forward there, plus the royalty financing now, which of course strengthen our balance sheet, allows us to accelerate AT278. And then the upside potential from those high value R&D platform technology areas such as oral delivery of peptides, give us multiple opportunities to generate significant value for the business, and significant value in the relative near and medium term there. So, we'll very much be focused now moving forward with AT278, getting ready for those phase 2 clinical studies in the second half of the year. Of course, deal making across that space, and as I mentioned, continuing those business development discussions and pipeline and partnering, which are very much active. So, as and when we can, of course, and we're in a position to do, we'll announce significant news flow to the market. And I'm sure we'll come back and talk to everybody once we have that. And thank you, for the questions today. There's always great questions asked on this format, and I think it, helps us put the presentation into context for everybody. So I hope you found the session useful today.
That's great. Sarah, David, thank you once again for updating investors this morning. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can really better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of ARECOR Therapeutics PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, so good afternoon to you all.